Hi everyone, welcome to the MrpTech podcast. This is episode 129. My name is Matt, and this is the weekly podcast discussing everyday tech for everyday people. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope everyone had a great holiday season. Hope you're able to spend lots of time with your family. Me personally, I had a great few weeks off. If you're a listener to this show and you've been listening to the last few weeks' episodes, you would have never noticed. But I did take a couple weeks off. Took a little break, and happy to be back on air this week. Before I get into this week's show, I just wanted to say, if you are a first-time listener and you listen to podcasts, you can download the audio version of this podcast by searching in any podcatcher or any podcast player. Just search for the MrpTech podcast. It's provided by podnuts.com. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is this week's episode is about the Showtime miniseries event that's been going on for the last 7 weeks, Escape at Dannemora. Now, I did a sort of precursor episode 122 of this podcast, where I talked about the Escape, Clinton Correctional Facility. I also talked about what it was like as a local during the actual prison escape. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go listen to it now. You can find it on YouTube, or you can download it, as I mentioned earlier, and check that out first. This week's episode is going to be strictly from a cinematic point of view, and I will try my best not to give spoilers for the show itself as best as I can if you haven't seen the show yet. But I may accidentally give away a couple of things here and there if I'm not too careful. So with that said, I'm going to do the best I can not to give any spoilers, but what I'm going to do is talk about the series in general and from the perspective of somebody who was local during the actual escape. I lived in the area, went through the whole ordeal just like everyone else in this area did. And I like to give my thoughts on the whole show in general. So, okay, Escape at Dannemora, the series as a whole has just concluded this past Sunday night with a extended last episode. It was about an hour and a half long. The show itself was 7 episodes long. Most of them ranged in about an hour in length. They aired on the Showtime network. And most of you know the story about 2 inmates at Clinton Correctional Facility who manipulated a worker in a tailor shop to provide them the necessary tools and other items that they needed to be able to escape from this prison that was in basically the middle of nowhere. They had a plan. The plan fell through, and then it went on to a 23-day manhunt nationwide, looking for these 2 inmates, and until the dramatic conclusion of the escape and all the events. So the very first thing that I want to note is that this show was produced by Ben Stiller, and many locals were concerned that there would be a lot of comedy in this particular show. Now, we have already seen a Lifetime movie production of the escape happenings at Dannemora, and that particular made-for-TV movie, again, that aired on Lifetime, basically took the whole thing as a joke. And there were a lot of people locally that were very upset at that particular movie. Some refused to watch it. Some watched it and just were absolutely ashamed at the overall production quality of that movie. And I myself watched the original made-for-TV movie, and I did not enjoy it. It basically made a mockery of everyone in the area. And when we heard that Ben Stiller was going to make a mini-series about this event, immediately red flags started popping up. The local news picked it up, and they tried to say right away that that Ben Stiller was taking this very seriously. He was doing his research from even just days after the prison escape. He started putting together ideas for this particular show and really did his homework. And when he came to the area, promised that he was going to try to keep it as factual as possible. He was going to be respectful of all of the local people and law enforcement and corrections officers while he was here, and try to tell a compelling story with factual events, and at the same time make it interesting for people out there that were unaware of the story. So I've watched many of the interviews with Ben Stiller, and he basically explains that he wants to remove himself from the comedy scene, at least for a while, and focus on directing. And he wanted to direct some serious movies. And this was a way for him to do that. And the cast that he got for this particular show, I don't think could have been any better. The lead characters, as most people know, Benicio del Toro played Richard Matt, Paul Dano played David Sweat, and Patricia Arquette played Joyce Mitchell. There was another actor named Eric Lang, and I could be pronouncing his last name wrong. I'm not sure about that. He played Joyce Mitchell's husband, Lyle. The acting in this series was just stellar. I want to start off with episode 1, and I'm not going to go through every episode, but from a local perspective. Okay, so the area surrounding Dannemora is a very mountainous region. There are many small towns. There's a few larger cities quite distant from Dannemora, maybe 10, 15 miles away. The city of Plattsburgh, an hour north and west, Malone. But there's not an awful lot that happens, and it's relatively quiet most of the time. And even though we have a major tourist season in the summertime, where we get a lot of people coming from outside the area, it still stays pretty quiet for the most part. So when you see the opening scenes in this particular series, it is quite evident that the research team behind the series really took its time to appreciate the area for what it is. There are dramatic scenes of the local windmills that are here. There are dramatic scenes of the mountainous region that you see. And from a local perspective, it's not very often, in fact, I don't recall ever seeing the area filmed on a major production scale before. I have seen like PBS documentaries on the region, the Adirondack region, filmed in high quality. But this was different. This was a major production, like watching a movie, and I was just blown away by how well the surrounding area was filmed. From the opening dialogue and scenes, I was a little concerned at first because we had Joyce Mitchell talking with the Inspector General of New York, and I was a little concerned at first of where they were going to go with the show. But it became very clear very early on in the series just how good the acting was going to be. Now, Patricia Arquette, the woman who played Joyce Mitchell, has been on interviews and mentioned that she didn't actually go and talk with Joyce Mitchell because she feared that the real Joyce would try to steer the story in her favor when it's quite evident from the Inspector General's report exactly what happened, even though Joyce denies a lot of it. Now, I'm not going to get into those details here. Anybody can argue all day about it. But Patricia Arquette got a dialogue coach, learned the accent, and did an outstanding job of speaking nearly identical to the way that she does. And for this reason, Escape at Dannemora has basically been nominated for Best Actor and Best Actresses awards for the Golden Globes. And not only did Patricia Arquette get nominated, but Paul Dano and Benicio del Toro and Eric Lang as well. Now, Eric Lang, the guy that plays Lyle Mitchell, did not have a whole lot to go off of his character. He had one interview that was seen, I believe, on the Today Show. He listened to Lyle, who hasn't been made available for public interviews at all. He sort of has wanted to stay out of the public eye because he supports his wife. He had one interview, and Eric completely nails the tone and dialect that the real Lyle Mitchell portrays. And every time that I watched it, I was just blown away on exactly. It was almost like you were watching the real events unfold. And this was just in the very first sort of few episodes. Now, as the story progresses, you get to see a look inside Clinton Correctional Facility. And the first thought of my mind that I was watching this is, how on earth did they allow this to be filmed inside the prison? Well, it turns out that in most cases they weren't allowed to be in the prison at all. In fact, Ben Stiller had to go to the governor of New York and explain to him his reasoning and why it should be held at Dannemora. And they actually were given the okay to film in a few different spots in the prison. They ended up actually having a set of the honor block not located in the prison. And they also filmed, I believe, the yard scenes in a prison in Pennsylvania. But they actually were able to get some very dramatic shots of inside Clinton Correctional Facility and gave you the real feel that you were inside the prison. Now, part of the fun of this for me was for two reasons. One, my brother was part of the whole screening process. He participated and was looking forward to being a part of the show in itself. He played a forest ranger at one point in time. And my father actually worked in the prison. So I actually got sort of the overall story of how the prison is actually set up. And he would often laugh because he would say, well, okay, yes, everything you're seeing, that's not the real honor block, but, where the prisoners are staying, it's not the real honor block, but, they're leaving the mess hall, and then next thing you know that they're in the honor block. Well, it's actually a 10-minute walk from the mess hall to the honor block. So he would pick up things like that normally others would not pick up on. And, there's a lot of, timing that happens when you're making TV shows or movies, and a 10-minute walk obviously isn't going to be that appealing to somebody who's watching. So those things get cut out, or they take licensing to make the show itself better. So we had lots of questions as we were watching the show. We had lots of people in the area are employed at the prison. So we hear stories all the time about different things. And with such an event, there are, everybody has their own truth. Everybody has their own stories that they've heard. So there's a lot of like borderline conspiracies that happen with this whole event, and really just makes for an interesting story. So I can see how it's going to be, from the outside perspective, a story that would want to be portrayed as messed up as the real events actually were. Now, I can't speak for everyone locally, and I can't speak for people in the broader surrounding areas or people that live far away. All I can do is speak from my perspective of how the show evolved over 6 to 7 weeks. And when you first start watching the show, you really sort of develop a feeling that you want these two inmates to succeed in their efforts. You sort of start rooting for them, and you sort of feel for them. There's a scene where David Sweat's character is talking on the phone with his mother, and his mother isn't giving him what he wanted. And that scene in particular caught me, and I started feeling bad for the guy. And then it hit me, wait a minute, these guys are actual murderers behind bars. And shortly thereafter, I went on to the great Facebook page that supports this show. It's called Escape at Dannemora official group on Facebook, and a lot of people that were involved with the show, a lot of fans of the show, all get together, and it's one of the coolest Facebook pages I think I've been a part of. There was a post there right after that particular episode, and it was actually, I believe, from one of the family members saying, it's great that you guys are all watching TV shows, but just remember, these people are actual murderers and they're behind bars for a reason. They should not be supported. And I had that same feeling as I was watching the show, even though from a cinematic point, not from a realistic point, but from the cinematic story, you sort of were rooting for them to get through that wall, or to get out of their cell, and really, you really wanted to see exactly how it happened. And so I took that standpoint early on that, okay, yes, I know the story. I know exactly what happens. And yes, that's filmed in a way that you want to support them, but you got to keep in mind, these are really bad people. So the story progresses. I'm not going to share a lot of the details, but the overall filming techniques that were used just blew my mind. There was a particular scene where the work has really sort of been completed, and David Sweat is timing how long it takes to get from his cell to the manhole cover. And that whole scene is an extended scene, basically going in and out of the tunnels at Clinton Correctional Facility, and that it really reminded me of the movie Birdman. If you've never seen that movie, there's a scene in Birdman where there's an extended shot that just goes on and on for like 5 minutes, and it's all one scene, no cuts, and just remarkably done. Now, this was more than one particular cut in this case, but it reminded me of that and how well it was filmed. You really felt that you were in the tunnels, and when he climbed in the steam pipe, you really felt claustrophobic as he was going through the steam pipe. Really an excellent job portraying what it probably felt like being down there. You felt like you were going to get caught. You felt like you could get stuck at any moment or hurt at any moment. It was really just well done. And so they're at the point where they're ready to escape, and again, you're rooting for that moment where they climb out of the manhole cover into the streets, and they finally make it out. They start walking down the road. Their plans didn't work out. Start walking down the road, and you're looking forward to the next episode where all of a sudden everyone realizes they're not there. Well, then the show takes a complete left turn. It actually goes back in time. And then the show hits you with just how bad these characters really were. And a lot of people didn't like that when they did that. They wanted to see the escape and the search and the rescue. Or not rescue. They wanted to see the escape and the conclusion of the show. They instead went back in time and showed the crimes that they committed and how awful they were, and what led up to them being in jail for the first time. And I thought that was absolutely brilliant to do, because number one, you were sort of rooting for them the whole time, and then you realize this isn't the Shawshank Redemption where the main actor is actually innocent. These guys were guilty and committed these crimes. So that set you up for the final hour and a half series, where the massive search operations were being conducted. And again, the filming of the mountainous region, there are some beautiful scenes of the Department of Corrections officers walking through the forests, just in scenes that were perfectly lit. Some of them were quite dark and damp, going through the swamps, the inmates finding camps in the woods, and just really made you feel a whole part of the show. Now, in the meantime, before I got to the last episode, I had seen on the Oxygen network that there was a made-for-TV documentary called The Dannemora Prison Break. It aired on Oxygen, and I had saw the last 3 minutes of it and when it was on, and I couldn't find it on again until I found that it was on demand. Eventually, I believe it got put up on YouTube. So you just search Dannemora Prison Break full episode Oxygen, and you could see the documentary that I think was very, very well done. It tells the whole story, and even interviews one of the inmates that escaped, and that really filled in the gaps that I didn't know about leading up into episode 6, where they went back in time. They talked about the 2 awful crimes that both inmates committed, and the backstory of Joyce Mitchell, who cheated on her first husband with her current husband, Lyle, and then which led to another affair with the prisoners, so the story tells. So that really filled in a lot of things. So I encourage everybody to check that documentary out as well. What I really like about Escape at Dannemora is that it takes the area, it respects the surrounding area. It respects the people of the area, state troopers, Department of Corrections, because a lot of the people that were in the real event actually came back to be a part of this show, whether you were state troopers, corrections officers, and actually even some former inmates as well, which is kind of strange. And I remember seeing sort of a behind-the-scenes video or interview talking with corrections officers and inmates who were filming in a prison yard, and they're all kind of glaring at each other because they all knew each other, and they basically put their differences behind them and shook hands and then made this particular show. And I can't even imagine what that must have been like to film those particular scenes. So we have real people, the real officers that were involved as a part of the show. It really just made it feel like it was the actual thing. Now, one of the final scenes is one of the inmates running from a state trooper. Boy, did it really make you feel that you were right there in the action. I've never seen a show filmed like this. I wonder if that has more to do with knowing. I really wonder if that has more to do with me being so close to the actual events, or if it's just filmed in such a great way. Seeing it the first time it's like brand new to everyone. You have that first experience, but you never get that first experience again. Anytime you see something new, and you always wish that you had that opportunity to see something for the first time again. So I don't know what it is. And I can tell you all that from my perspective, and I know there are locals that did not like the show. From my perspective, I actually really enjoyed the story. I felt like I got to know more of what happened. I also know that the show took a lot of liberties to make it more entertaining, or liberties for the sake of time. And I was okay with that. I wasn't expecting it to be like a documentary, every single fact there. They did take quite a few liberties. And that stirred up some controversy on and off during the last few weeks. So watching that, though, and reading the Inspector General's report, which is quite fascinating, and this other documentary that sort of collaborated all the facts I have to say that the story is pretty right on with the Inspector General's report and just the word around town, so to speak. There are a lot of stories out there that didn't make it to the show. Who knows if those stories are true or based off of truths, that type of thing. But I think the story was represented well. It was a really messed up story, a really fascinating story. And some people in real life actually were sort of rooting for these inmates to make it, and others were literally carrying around guns on their property to make sure their family was safe. I mean, it was a scary time when it actually happened. And schools were locked down. Houses, everybody kept their doors locked. Everybody was careful whenever they went places. It was not a good time. And actually, interesting fact, when I was on my way to work, I have about an hour commute. I was on my way to work at one point in time, and out of the corner of my eye in a spot in a boggy swamp off the side of the highway, I saw two people standing there during this prison escape. They were both wearing the same thing. They were wearing blue pants and blue sweatshirts. The sweatshirts had a hood, and I could see them overlooking sort of the mountains, and the sun was reflecting off of their heads, and like they had bald heads. And it was just a blink of a couple of seconds, and then they were gone out of my sight. And I sort of had a moment of panic because I had never seen anybody in that particular spot before. So, I just like everybody else in the area, we called it in just to we probably wasn't them, but we wanted to make sure that we reported it. And there was a lot of false reports during that time. And for me, it wasn't about the reward or anything like that, but it just happened to just see these two people standing on the side of a highway, which was surprising to me. So a lot of people were doing this, paying attention to their properties within 100 miles of this prison and calling in reports of men walking on railroad tracks or men walking down the road, that type of thing. And eventually the false reports led to their eventual conclusion of the search. So I think the show was just brilliant. I think it tells a great story. I think people who weren't involved with or didn't live locally would probably really enjoy the story. It's not a super action packed, jam-packed movie that you're going to see high-speed car chases or anything like that, or explosions. But if you're patient and you can sit with it, it's a really, really neat story. So if you haven't seen the show, I encourage you to take a look at it. It's on Showtime. Maybe it'll eventually be on Netflix, but you can binge watch it now. So even if you rented Showtime for a month for, I don't know, was it $7, something like that, you could watch the show and then cancel your subscription. Now, to put a technology spin on this, there have been a couple of books that have been written about the prison escape that are available in audiobook format. And I am currently listening to, with my Audible subscription, Wild Escape, The Prison Break from Dannemora and the Manhunt That Captured America, written by Chelsea Rose Marcius, Marcius, and narrated by Christopher Price and Lisa Stathopoulos. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, but it's an audiobook. It's about 7 hours long, released in March of 2018. I'm an hour in, and it's pretty good so far. I've heard a lot of great things about this particular book. There's also another audiobook available. These are available in regular books as well. It's called Escape from Dannemora, Richard Matt, David Sweat, and the Great Adirondack Manhunt. This is by Michael Benson, narrated by Al Kessel. It is 9 hours and 17 minutes long. This was just released in December. I'm really looking forward to listening to this book next. And there is another book that's out that is not available in audiobook format yet. It's called He's Out. I don't have the details on it yet, but it's actually written by the daughter of Richard Matt and tells the story from her perspective, what it was like for her family to live through this whole ordeal. So there are some really great books that are all based on the actual events. So if you are not someone who wants to spend the money on renting Showtime for a month, then you can actually read the books as well. So that's a really interesting way to do it, and I'm really looking forward to those books coming up. Just started it this morning on my way into work today. So, what did you think about the series Escape at Dannemora? Did you live through the events locally? Are you from far away and watch the show? I'd love to hear it. You can either put it your opinions in the comments, or you can send me an email, mrptechreviews@gmail.com. I'd love to hear the stories. You can also join our chat room. It's a Discord chat room. If you go to my website, mrptechreviews.com, click on the Discord button. It'll bring you right into our chat room, and let's have some conversations there too. We have a great group in our chat room, and they are often giving us all great ideas for the show, technology topics. If you're interested in technology topics, that's what this show is about. It's about everyday technology topics for everyday people. So you don't have to be an expert by any means to enjoy using technology. And I try to talk about all sorts of things technology related with this show. And this week's episode, a little bit of audiobooks and just a little bit about a local series that we've all been watching for the last 7 weeks. So that's going to do it for this week. Thanks everybody for listening. We will see you next time.